Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kelly Goyer. I am Director of Field Services for Multi-Material Stewardship Western. Just to freshen things up a little bit, I'm just wondering if I could get a brave volunteer from somewhere in the first 3 rows to try saying Multi-Material Stewardship Western 3 times fast. There's $20 on the line for you. Took me a few weeks and a few phone calls before I could get that all out, but. So we are the most recent stewardship program to launch in Saskatchewan. So when I say stewardship program, I'm asking you to recall programs like the scrap tires and oil, waste electronics, and the like. We are the newest kid on the block, if you will, and we are involved in those waste, packaging, and paper materials commonly found in many of your municipal recycling programs. So if it's our term for them is a steward, or otherwise a business that's involved in the generation of printed paper or packaging as a means of doing business, either generating it in the province or causing it to be imported into the province. That's the material that's involved in our program. It's focused on residential material only, so our program is not focused on commercially generated material. So if you think of the local co-op grocery store in your community that's pumping cardboard out the back door into a compactor or something like that, that material is not included in our program, but the many products and packaging that go out the door home to residents, home with residents, that's the stuff that we're talking about. We are a not-for-profit organization. We were formed by the paper and packaging sector as a response to the Saskatchewan Ministry's regulation, which was passed in 2013. It is an extended producer responsibility type of regulation that's focused on having stewards involved in paying up to 75% of the net costs for recycling those materials, and I'll get into that a little bit more in a few slides. We are part of Canadian Stewardship Services Alliance, family of recycling organizations. So we have sister organizations in British Columbia, in Manitoba, in Ontario, that are performing identical functions to my office in Saskatoon. Canadian Stewardship Services Alliance, again, there's $20 on the line for you if you can do that one too. They're also a nonprofit, and really they were formed as a means to harmonize steward organizations, steward programs, that are operating in other parts of the country. And really harmonization is focused on gaining efficiencies and effective wherever possible. So to give you a quick example, instead of my office employing and utilizing accounting and communications and design and all that kind of stuff, we're able to gain efficiencies, and I can access that expertise out of our CSSA office in Toronto. So it keeps us lean and effective. I mentioned extended producer responsibility, and really the Saskatchewan Household Packaging and Paper Stewardship Program states that stewards of packaging and paper supplied to households take responsibility for up to 75% of the net costs of handling that material. And stewards can either choose to join an organization that's discharging that obligation, or they're free to develop their own program. That is a choice that they can make. However, having to make the choice at all is not voluntary, as we are talking about a regulation. So stewards must do one or the other. Municipalities, however, are voluntary. Municipalities are not required to join our program, but there, I think, would only be 0 people in this room that would be willing to walk away from a cash handout of any kind for your program. So So really our value proposition to Saskatchewan businesses is this. Instead of having to go through the cost and burden of researching and preparing and launching a program on your own that would allow you to discharge your obligation, you can join MMSW, where we have already gone and done all of that work. We've also gone so far as to become very efficient at doing that as we operate in multiple other areas. We're harmonized. It's a very efficient and cost-effective way of discharging your obligation. We're governed by a board of directors. That includes representatives from Canada's largest national companies, most of whom will be MMSW's largest paying stewards. So we're really looking at probably a 90-10, maybe even a 95-5 split. The overwhelming lion's share of fees paid into the program by stewards are those companies that are operating in multiple markets across the country. There is a very small number of stewards that will end up being Saskatchewan-only businesses, but the number is quite small. We're based on a collective model, so every steward that joins MMSW gets the exact same agreement, and that agreement sets out how their fees are assessed for their paper and or packaging. And it doesn't matter if you're large Walmart, or if you're a smaller business operating just a couple of outlets, everyone gets treated the exact same way. So, as many of you may recall, we were set to launch in January of 2015. The Ministry of Environment put out a list of amendments late in 2015. We needed to, late in 2014, we didn't need to step back and figure out how we were going to address those. So I'll just quickly review the nature of those amendments. As you will recall, there is a permanent exemption in place for businesses that are under $2 million in annual sales, or that generate less than 1 ton of waste packaging and paper, or that operate as a single retail location. You check any of those 3 boxes, you're out. There was also announced a 2-year exemption from reporting and paying fees for those businesses between 2 and 5 million in annual revenue, as well as all newspapers. And approval of stewardship fees, so those fees per kilogram that those businesses will need to pay on their paper or packaging. Approval of those fees was to rest with the minister. So those amendments were put into place, so we need to step back and reassess how we were going to launch a plan that was focused on meeting those amendments as well as the rest of the program. So as I mentioned, MMSW, our payments program is set to pay up to, according to the regulation, up to 75% of net costs. We're not there yet, and I'll get to that in the next slide. Also, I want to be clear that MMSW will not fund municipalities for certain streams of materials. So materials that are not WPP as defined by the regulation, obviously. WPP from any industrial, commercial, or institutional sources. Again, this is a residential only focused program. So any schools, hospitals, grocery stores, that type of stuff, that material is outside of the program. Any WPP that's supplied by non-compliant or exempt stewards, so any of those businesses that have not registered and have not paid for their materials, or any of those that are exempt from the program. Also, this goes without saying, but also any packaging that already has its own stewardship program, so anything like oil containers, antifreeze, that kind of stuff. So we also had to adopt a phased implementation, and that goes back to what I was saying just earlier before. We're not quite at the 75% of net yet. We are in transition period, which began January 1, 2015. It is technically a 2-year window where the ministry is working with, it formed a working group for businesses 2 to 5 million in size, as well as newspapers, to generate some recommendations or some guidelines for how that cluster could join our program as stewards. And we're in transition period until that working group concludes its work. The 2 to 5 million group comes in and newspapers are brought into the program as well. Then that will trigger the transition from transition period to post-transition phase 1. And we will be there until our advisory committee, as you may recall under the plan, MMSW has formed an advisory committee, and they are populated by members from SUMA, from SARM, from ARMAS, the Association of Regional Waste Management Authorities, as well as Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council, as well as 3 positions occupied by stewards. And I'll touch on the advisory committee role here in just a couple of slides. But their primary function in terms of the transition to phase 2 would be to provide a definition for effective and efficient recycling of WPP. So efficient and effective was the language that was used in the regulation. Hence, we've also used that in our stewardship plan approved by the ministry, but there is no definition given. So we're going to, as municipalities report their tons of material into us, and we begin to learn more about what it actually looks like on the ground in Saskatchewan, the advisory committee will then use that data to put forward a recommendation for a definition for that. When that definition is accepted and MMSW decides how they're going to proceed from there, then we launch into post-transition phase 2. I know this has been a bit technical, sorry, but essentially post-transition phase 2 will be the fully built-out program as it was intended to launch last go-around. The payment method has changed. So we were based on tons. However many tons you were recycling was going to influence what you were paid. We are now at a per household fixed rate methodology until we can get to some of those further transition periods. Those payments are subject to agreement and compliance with collector and processor policies and procedures. And that really speaks to quality assurance for MMSW. We just want to make sure that municipal programs are functioning well and that they're effective at what they're doing. That no one is burying their bales of recycling in a small landfill somewhere in Saskatchewan, right? So the advisory committee really, as I mentioned, they're populated by Saskatchewan experts, folks who are intimately familiar with our province and its many nuances and its geography. And so those are the folks that are going to be on the committee, and their primary role is to provide guidance and input to issues as they arise, primarily beginning with that definition for efficient and effective. So what does this program mean for Saskatchewan local governments and regional waste authorities? In transition period, we'll be issuing a payment to cover the portion of costs for your municipal recycling programs. It is a per household rate of $11.75. That's an annual amount. And we will distribute that payment on a quarterly basis. I also want to point out that this, in transition period right now, these per household payments are permanent residences are eligible only. Payments will not be issued for seasonal households until such time as we can get better data on the scope of that issue. We've heard about the challenges around seasonally affected municipalities with the seasonal spikes in those folks staying in your community. I've heard from about a half dozen municipalities. In fact, we have held our first advisory committee meeting on January 19th, and we've put that issue in front of them. So it's a bit of a tricky issue. On the one hand, MMSW wants to avoid double paying for households. So if you live in Saskatoon but you have a cabin in Candle Lake, MMSW has paid for your permanent residence already, $11.75, but do we want to then again pay for a household that we've already paid for? On the flip side, when those households, those cabins are occupied, your communities are having to deal with their material. So And then to add to that mix, we are also looking at seasonal households that are owned by individuals that aren't even part of the province. So the advisory committee has asked us to dig into that issue in 2016 and get some very clear data on just what's the magnitude of this issue and report back to them. We will also require weigh scale tickets. In the past, projections or estimates may have been valid for other programs asking you to provide that type of information, but we will need some sort of tracking number attached to your tons when you report it on a quarterly basis. And finally, the other major piece that's changed was, you may recall from last time round, there was somewhat of a deadline for municipalities to join, and then you were sort of out until the next year. That's no longer the case. We had a deadline of December 31st. That was simply a deadline that we set for any municipalities that joined by that time. Your payments would begin to accrue January 1st. You can join now. That's no problem at all. We'd be happy to have you on board. If you do, being at the tail end of January, that would just mean that your payments would begin to accrue in February. And so finally, just a quick program update. I'm quite happy to announce that as we launch our program right out of the gates, year one, we're looking at 76% of total Saskatchewan households are on board. This equates to 414 local governments, represented either directly in a one-on-one relationship with MMSW or via a regional waste authority. There's a dozen regional waste authorities that have joined. And all told, just roughly speaking, if you look at $11.75 per household and the total households represented by these figures, we're looking at approximately $3.67 million in financing for Saskatchewan municipalities and regional waste authorities to continue the good work that you've been doing all these many, many years. And we'll open the panel for questions.
Well, thank you very much. All three of you have given us a lot to think about and a lot of information. So I'd like to open it up to questions. There's a microphone in the middle row, and if you'd like to make sure you enunciate clearly and loudly, and because it'll go on the website. So we'll start it off.
Murray Connertuke from Town of Strasbourg, councillor. Waste is a big issue all the time. I'd like a little more information on that Montana experiment. Like, it seemed like it was just implemented and it just took over. How much federal funding or state funding was in on that? Because that seemed to go very quick. We're probably, we have a regional landfill. Our costs over the last 6 years, it went from 60,000 to over 114,000. They keep going up and up. I know you guys are looking after the waste once it comes into the province. I'd like the environment to have a program to stop waste from coming in. When I go to Sobeys or if I go to Home Depot, I unpackage my stuff right there and leave it on the counter. I say, this is your problem, it's not mine. To stop landfills from filling up all the time, we have to stop it from coming into the province. I know this is a big question to answer, but I mean, we've got to stop it somehow. I'm from a farm. I grew up on a farm, and you talk about the waste barrel burning. We'd go to the store, and small community, we'd buy pants, take them off the shelf. We just got a little receipt. Now you buy pants, and they got how to wash them, how to roll them up, how to fold them, everything like that. I cut that off at the store and say, this is yours. I don't need it at my place because my cost on recycling is going up and up and up. Just, you don't have to comment on this. I just wanted to put it out there. Thank you.
Oh yeah, you can answer Montana first, yes. I don't have the answer, right?
So with regards to Montana specifically, their full presentation is on that SWANA website. The reason theirs went so quickly is it was a federal regulation. So the US EPA came in and told the states that they were required to enforce the federal regulations and standards. And if they weren't willing to do so, then the US EPA would regulate in their state. So the US has a very, like I said, a very good understanding of the scarcity of their water and the importance of protecting their groundwater. And so that's why they have such high fines of $30,000, you know, for infraction a day. And we're still building up that understanding. We live in a culture where we think we have a lot of land. We can just throw that land out. We haven't shown lots of impacts. We think we have lots of, because we have 100,000 lakes, our water sources are good. So theirs really came back to that federal regulation. As far as the funding, no, they didn't have a whole bunch of funding in the Montana example. It was just back to those fines and the understanding that they needed to protect that groundwater. So in their case, there was some limited funding, but not a lot from the state. Alberta has given funding back in the 70s and 80s for theirs, more on the construction of the new. And they have a lot of lessons learned in their solid waste management strategy of how they're changing their funding structure to be more on the recycling and reduction side rather than the actual landfilling side itself, to show that by putting it on the landfill side, it artificially deflated the cost of landfill disposal, and the fact is it's not free or cheap to handle that waste, and people have to be paying appropriately, which is up in that $100 a ton, not the free range. So I would encourage you to look at that Montana presentation for sure, and Che-Wei can comment on how we're trying to reduce the packaging.
Just a quick comment on the U.S., why the EPA can do it, because they do have a different federal system. So in terms of our system, federal government, maybe they can, maybe they cannot, but it's a very different management when it comes to the Constitution. And back to your questions on how to reduce waste coming to the province is actually a very good question. They are related to many aspects of it, and often is that we are a very small province. So often is that the material coming in, it's really hard to force producers to change their packaging. One thing that we're trying to do is, Kelly touched on this, is extended producer responsibility with our regulations, which Saskatchewan is not the only province that's implementing EPR. It's a Canada-wide initiatives. So when we implement the EPR program, often is this, we obligate a producer to take on the cost of recycling. And so that means that now when they sell to Saskatchewan, they have to think about the production, they have to think about shipping. Now the last one they have to do is cost of disposal. So would that lead to the desired impact that you're talking about, completely reduce waste? It might, but have to take many years to churn out gear and wheel, mainly because that we're talking about, if we expand this to Canada, Canada is really a small country when it comes to purchasing power in terms of buying the bulks. So to force multinational to change their behavior takes a little bit more time. We have started seeing that already, when it comes to the MNRP program. I believe Saskatchewan is the newest one, but BC has it, so is Manitoba. So every member is of CSSA. Is that $20 still out?
Yeah, the $20 is
Okay.
still on the table, if you can say it 3 times fast.
Did you notice that I didn't try to say it? I just say CSSA because it's easier. So with that changing, you actually see some major companies are starting to change the way they're packaging, and one of them is a Canadian company. It's London Drugs. They are now, when they go overseas, when they purchase certain items to Canada, they would ask the local producers to say, instead of packaging each things individually, can you put them on a bigger box, and then so we don't have to pay as much, right? And it makes sense. And some of these like London Drugs, and it's actually a smaller one in terms of if you compare to Walmart and Loblaw, they're negotiating items when they purchase something around 3 decimals because they're purchasing so much, right? So to get to where you are, having more EPR regulation will definitely help. To get to that, you can leave your packaging at the door. that will probably require a totally different set of regulations because a lot of European countries do that. But European countries also have recycling regulations that are very strict, very detailed, and it's just how they approach waste. It's a little bit different culture here in terms of going into that much detail.
Next.
Hi, my name is Laura Morissette. I'm from the city of Weyburn. I understand that Sarcans across the province are no longer accepting milk jugs. So I'm just wondering if there's going to be a new program put in place, or is it going to follow as the responsibility of the municipal governments to keep those out of our landfills?
I can't speak in terms of whether there's a new program coming, but dairy containers are now considered part of MMSW's stream of materials. So they're welcome to find their way into whatever existing recycling programs are happening in Saskatchewan. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, the original Sarcan program is actually a voluntary program. That means it has nothing to do with provincial government. We did not enact any regulations. When it comes to dairy industry, we're essentially looking at 2 to 3 companies, might be just 2 now. They all got together and they approached Sarcan and say that we will, give you some funding and can you collect the milk containers on our behalf. It wasn't a deposit program, so you bring it back, you don't get any deposit back. And when MNRP was coming forward, the milk producers decided that it's easier to be part of the MNRP because then people can put that in their blue bins or depots, right? So that's what the shift happens. There is a transition period, which is about 6 months. Yeah, it is 6 months. So June 30th is the last day. And Sarcan is quite aware of communication because we have regular communication with them. They're putting posters up in their Sarcan depots and letting people know that in the future they can leave that in their blue bin or take to their recycling depot.
Thanks.
Brian Hickey, counselor from the very small city of Melville. Anyway, you mentioned, Kelly, that you're paying $11.75 per household annually, and then part of that, there's another bullet there. You said weigh scale tickets are required. A lot of places don't have weigh scales. Are you serious about weigh scales, or do you mean just some way of tracking it with records that are kept at our landfill station?
Yeah, we're certainly open to working with local governments to work out a way that tracking can be provided if there is no weigh scale ticket available. We're putting the final touches now on sort of what would be a methodology that would be acceptable to MMSW and still allow us to track that material accurately without overburdening the municipal collector. So weigh scale tickets required really, for the most part, refers to an actual ticket being generated. If that's not possible, then we would be interested in having a conversation with you and working something out. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Richard Prefontaine, Mayor Rockland. You guys are sitting up here talking about cardboard boxes and milk jugs. The question I got, what do we do with household hazardous wastes? Where are they going? They're going in your landfills right now. There's no program in place to get rid of them.
Yes, there is not an HHW program right now, and that is leaving. We have been trying to develop HHW program. At this moment, that is municipalities are paying for the HHW days. I had a conversation with EnviroTech, who is one of the waste contractors that specialize in HHW. They're seeing more demand for, but at this moment, yes, there isn't a lot of places to take those materials.
Because to us, that's a priority.
Yeah.
Have you made your views known to the Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council?
Not really.
I would encourage you to get in touch with them because I do believe one of their mandates is to research and encourage government to add programs. So you may want to make your views known to the SWRC, and they can fill you in on what work they've done so far on advancing HHW material.
But they used to come around yearly and pick this stuff up,
Yeah,
and that stopped like 6, 7, 8 years ago.
yeah. Yeah, it's a bit of a checkered past with some programs happening, and SaskTel was a sponsor years ago for some of them, and they happened a few years in a row, and then they didn't, and so it's been a bit of a spotty past in terms of HHW collections. But I would encourage you, sir, to go to the SWRC and let them know that this is on the mind of your residents as well, and they can bring you up to speed on where that file is at.
Okay, thanks.